190E 2.65 speed, rough idle, no idle, rich running. One of my Patreon supporters contacted me this week after buying a 190E 2.65 speed. And this is a pretty big deal because the 2.6 is one of those cars where you just can't get a 2.65 speed. They just don't exist. And we're going to look at some reasons why this 2.65 speed 190E may not be running like it's supposed to, or why the other owners just threw up their hands and said, we give up. So let's look at this 190E 2.6. First of all, this car is super rich, even though its control pressures seem to be in the 5.3 to 5.5 bar range, which is normal for a single fuel pump 190E. It seems like the car is smoking a lot, it's fouling plugs, and it'll barely idle. Now, despite the fact these pressures are good, it makes me wonder if the fuel return line going back to the tank is blocked. And sometimes a blockage can be partial, such that you shoot the line with air, and the line will pass air, but it won't pass liquid. Remember, liquid is denser than air, so it has a harder time passing. Now, what we usually do here is we make a separate fuel return and set everything up like we normally would. EHA at 0.4 bar difference of pressure, the airflow meter plate with 3 millimeters of detent using the idle air mixture screw, plug the EHA in, plug the idle air valve in, verify we don't have any major vacuum leaks, and then let her rip. And if the engine runs pretty well and smooth, and doesn't run rich, doesn't try to die, then we're okay. Now, why do I think this car is a blocked fuel return? Well, after thinking about it, one, a blocked fuel return will make the car run extremely rich, but two, it'll make it run so rich that it'll increase the head pressures in the fuel pressure regulator and the fuel distributor and literally choke the air off. Engine can't take in enough air. And I ran into this problem the first time on a 420 SEL that would pass air back to the tank, but not fuel. So there's one potential problem. Now, potential problem number two is we have rust in the gas tank. And rust in the gas tank can do all sorts of weird things, from blocking filters, which means you may have enough pressure but not enough volume. Or you may end up with another scenario where as soon as you run your engine and your new injectors and all that stuff, you've contaminated the system with rust. Now, in this case, I don't think that's the issue, because after installing new injectors, the owner of the car pulled those new injectors and tested them, and they did okay. But I'm just telling you this if you're a do-it-yourself and you're getting this kind of information out of the video. If you have a car that's been sitting for a long time, fuel tanks do rust. Now, my third problem goes to the car's ignition system. Why would a car run really rough, run really rich, misfire, struggle to start, no power, etc.? Well, you can have a couple of different things. You could have a bunch of moisture getting into the distributor, which would cause similar symptoms. Weak idle. You'd have to set the idle way up to get the car to run. Number two, you could have a bad crank position sensor. Now, this would mean the car dies when it gets hot and misfires to the intake when you crank it. That's usually a sign that the crank position sensor is going bad. But I still haven't mentioned one other major issue, and that could be a vacuum leak. Now, the M103 engine has a bunch of vacuum lines hidden under the fuel distributor and airflow meter and intake, and the only way to really make sure these are okay is to get underneath the fuel, the intake, and look at where the idle air valve connects and make sure none of those lines are cracked. Because if that's the case, then the car won't be able to draw enough air in through the airflow meter, and instead will just bog down. We had this happen on a 190E 2.3 16 valve where the idle air valve hose kept coming out of the fuel distributor boot, underneath the fuel distributor boot. You can't see this hose. It goes underneath. You can't even see it with the car in a lift. You have to feel it. And once I felt it, I was like, oh my gosh, here's my problem. this thing is sucking more air in, you know, from below the throttle plate than above. Like the air has to come from above the throttle plate. The idle air valve is there to let a little bit of extra air in when that idle air valve switch closes. And by the way, if that switch doesn't close, you'll get a bad weak idle as well. But often rich running means you're just not, the air is just not pulling the plate down, and then the KE control unit isn't able to do its thing and adjust the EHA for a proper air-fuel ratio. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications. And hopefully somebody got some good information out of this. And remember, when you buy a car that 3 other people have worked on and you try to fix it yourself, there are 3 personality traits that are going to get that issue resolved. First of all, a lot of patience. Second of all, determinism. And number 3, troubleshooting or problem-solving skills. So most people lack those, and that's kind of how you win in a situation like this, by employing patience, patience especially, and determinism, and good troubleshooting, because troubleshooting is a logical process. Logic, unfortunately, is not something that's very popular today. And I will, you know, I sometimes find myself falling into illogical patterns and not using the right test equipment or test variables. So don't shy away from using empirical data and, you know, good and accurate problem-solving methods to get to the bottom of weird issues like on this 190E. All right, guys, thank you so much. Talk to you next week.